Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. It's an honor and privilege for me to introduce Senator Thom Tillis, the junior senator from North Carolina. I first met Thom at a women's event put together by my wife, Aldona Vosch, for the then gubernatorial candidate, Pat McCrory. He was the featured guest. It was in the early days of his role as Speaker of the State House, 2011, and there had been a great deal of buzz about this businessman turned politician and all that he was accomplishing. Along with the 400 women in the crowd, I was immediately impressed with his intellect, clarity, and presence. And he certainly has lived up to that impression. You all know better than me the senator's accomplishments in the State House and the historical changes that took place during his time there. You also know the excitement of that election night in 2014 when he won the Senate seat against then-incumbent Kay Hagan. One of the great political and consequential victories in recent years. Thom is a confident guy. It was always a known to him. He called me that night not many minutes after his victory was announced. He caught me in the middle of a hysterical outburst of excitement, as if the Duke basketball team had again beat the Tar Heels. He was cool as can be and ready to go to work. It was a special night. I have the good fortune of frequently speaking with Karl Rove on various matters. Karl has spent a great deal of time focusing on Senate candidates. When I told Karl yesterday that I was going to be introducing the senator, his excitement about the 2014 Senate class and Thom Tillis was quite remarkable. He said, and I quote, "Tillis was part of the class of 2014, which has become a very influential, hardworking, smart, and determined group of senators. Thom is well respected by his colleagues, a workhorse, not a show horse. He pushes for action. Thom has many committee and subcommittee assignments in the Senate, including the Committee on Agriculture, Armed Services, Judiciary, and Veteran Affairs. He's supported by his lovely wife, Susan, and their two children, Lindsay and Ryan. When it comes to politics and policy, we enjoy the complications of a wide range of conflicting issues. As in business, when things get too complicated for me to display good judgment, I take my analysis to the highest level so to better enable directional decision-making. That is why I have one big major overriding political policy outcome I wish to achieve. That is, I never, ever want to be governed by Democrats again. Senator Thom Tillis is an important teammate in that initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Senator Thom Tillis.
Well, thank you, everybody. It's great to be close to home now and out of D.C. It's replete with opportunities up there, but my best time as a U.S. Senator is when I'm traveling across the state. And Congressman Walker and Congressman Hudson, it's great to see you. I mean, these two guys are great members of our Republican delegation, our congressional delegation, and I appreciate all the work you're doing and your commitment to producing results. I'm going to be, somebody give me a high sign. I'm going to try and keep my comments short so that we can hear Congressman Hudson and then possibly answer some questions. But I'll give you a quick update first, just an update in Washington in general, and then I'll talk a little bit about national security issues. But the media, what you hear outside, could give you a fairly distorted view of what is occurring in Washington. For example, I did a floor speech yesterday to summarize the work that we did using the Congressional Review Act to repeal some 14 significant regulations that sum total were going to cost the industry, and we're beginning to cost the industry about $67 billion a year, about 56 million paperwork hours a year. All that's done. They're on the president's desk. I think we have maybe one more to be signed into law. That's a part of the promises that we made and that we're keeping. Now we have the health care bill before us. We're getting it scored now. We'll begin working on the Senate response to the baseline bill that was sent to us from the House. It's critically important that we do something, though. One of the things that you hear in Washington, it's almost as if this is something new and different that may happen, but we will always have the status quo. The status quo is not going to be the status quo. The healthcare environment in the country is at serious risk of imploding for the segment of the population that the healthcare bill actually addresses. The narrative would make you think that everybody's healthcare is going to change with this bill. But the reality is group policies, what's on Medicare, what's on Medicaid will fundamentally remain the same. It's about fixing in a responsible, sustainable way that segment of the population, about 20 or 30 million people who did not have a health care choice, who were concerned with pre-existing conditions, who may have had 26-year-olds that were no longer going to be on their parents' health plans. That's the segment of the population that we're trying to work on. And I'm confident that we're going to get a bill to the President's desk. And then we're going to set about the work of fleshing out or building on top of this foundation, which is this first bill. I told my colleagues in the Senate lunch this week, if we spend too much time trying to make this bill perfect, we'll miss the point. This lays the groundwork for all of the other work that we have to do through administrative action under Secretary Price and through additional bipartisan work that we'll have to do over the course of the next 6 to 9 months to provide a viable, sustainable, compassionate, responsible solution for health care in this country. And it can be done, and I believe it will be done. Then we'll work on tax reform, and I've heard from some of y'all about some of the concerns from the House proposed tax bill. I think that we'll have to do some work on that, and we'll be working on that through the summer. But then we have so many other things we have to do. First among them, something that you're talking about today, is national security. And I don't think that you can talk about national security any longer without talking about homeland security. On the flight down from D.C. this morning, I sat next to someone who's in the energy industry. And I've told them I'm optimistic that maybe for the first time in decades, really since the Reagan era, we may be able to use other non-lethal, highly effective weapons to influence national security. Energy exploration and natural gas extraction provides us with an ability to build relationships with Eastern Europe and Western Europe that we don't have today. You know, people criticize the European nations for not being as forceful in reaction to Russian aggression, but when 1 out of 4 of every electrons that flow through their grid come through energy provided by Russia, you kind of understand. Imagine if we were dependent on some other nation, potentially hostile nation, for 1/4 of our energy supply. So let's do what we have to do to provide a viable, sustainable, predictable resource. Because the moment we do that, in Senate Armed Services Committee, I want to recognize Robert Wilkie here. I call him Colonel Wilkie or Forrest Gump because he has so much history and so many stories. That, you know, we go into the Senate Armed Services Committee hearing and we talk about how weapon systems are taking 20 years to develop and they're highly complex, highly costly, that our near-peer competitors, if they can't beat us qualitatively, they are beginning to create their own quality in the quantity of the weapon systems that they have. Well, why don't we change the game by putting on the table this weapon called energy, this weapon that could reduce the resources that Russia has to catch up with us. So we have to focus on that. We also have to focus on continuing to take the fight to ISIS and terrorist organizations. I'm almost concerned that we haven't paid that much attention over the past, except for those of you who are really wonks, like John Hood. You're not maybe paying attention to what's going on in the Middle East now, in Iraq or Syria or Afghanistan. There are serious fights there. We're trying to insert the right sorts of resources so that we can enable the indigenous forces there, friendly forces there, to take the fight to ISIS, Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, the Taliban. But we have to take that area. That area is not reduced in threats. And where they get pinned down in the Middle East, they emerge elsewhere, like in the Sinai in Egypt, like in Northern Africa, and a number of other places. The Iran terror network is very active across the globe. They have manifestations literally all across the globe. We have to continue to figure out how we're going to redouble our efforts to fund and support our national security agencies, our military agencies, and the various components that come together to protect our national security interests, but also our homeland security interests. Last week in a hearing, then FBI Director Comey, a lot of people were trying to use that as a discussion about the Russia investigation. I guess that's okay, but I spent most of my time talking to them about FBI activities investigating homeland security threats that are terrorist-inspired. And he said something that's very important. It got maybe watered down or diluted in the news cycle, but he said there are 1,000 active investigations for what they consider to be homegrown terrorist legitimate threats that do not appear to have any nexus with Middle Eastern or terrorist organizations. He then went on to say there's at least another 1,000 or more that do seem to have their roots in some sort of association or inspiration from the Middle East. And 300 of them are people who came to this country through the refugee program. So we have to recognize that that threat is real and that we have to focus on homeland security in concert with what we're doing to project our national security interests. The last thing I'll leave you with there, because I see Ambassador Kane here. I also believe a very important part of improving our national security posture and the tools is to make sure that we understand that foreign aid is a very important part of those tools. There are some people, particularly people of my ideology, that think that we should zero out the foreign aid budget. I will tell you, every general, every admiral, anyone I've ever had come before the Senate Armed Services Committee, when we asked them what they think about that proposition, they said, just make sure you buy me more bullets. Because if we're not able to establish relationships, now we can debate how the money should be spent, whether or not it's being spent properly, and whether or not there's proper transparency. But if we reduce these tools that are available to special operations, to diplomatic entities and other peoples in these very dangerous areas, then we do make it more difficult for our men and women in uniform who are out there trying to do the right thing, our diplomats and everyone else. So that's something that I think is very important, needs to weigh into the foreign policy debate. Now, the last thing I'll leave you with, and it has to do with something I've just embraced as a title that I may even have on my tombstone, or actually my cremation urn, because I'm going to be cremated. But it's going to say Thom Tillis, former Speaker, former Senator, R.I.N.O. Let that sink in for a minute. But I refuse to let partisan people define what R.I.N.O. means. What R.I.N.O. means to me is very simple: a Republican in need of outcomes. And anybody that watched what we did for 4 years when I was Speaker of the House, I think it's very difficult to dispute that we produced very conservative, very measured, but very persistent conservative policies that have benefited North Carolina. Pick a subject: life, Second Amendment, tax reform, medical malpractice reform, regulatory reform. I could go on. I could go on for a long time. But how do we do that? John, in the introduction, John said that you're going to have panels today that are going to stretch your thinking. Let that happen. Was it John Locke who said to prejudge other men's notions is not to show their darkness, but to put out our own eyes? What we need to do is be the party of results. When I was called by one of the talking heads that I was a R.I.N.O., and I literally on the fly came up with Republican in need of outcomes, is that we have an opportunity right now to take a note of what happened in the election last year. We lost Republican seats in the Senate. We lost Republican seats in the House, didn't we, gentlemen? We lost the governor's mansion. And incidentally, we lost the majority on the Supreme Court. That's not a mandate for everything that we have to sell. What we got was the opportunity to lead and produce results. This is a mandate for results. This is a time to get good in place versus pursuing perfect at the expense of getting nothing done. And it will stretch our thinking. It will make us accept things that fall short of what I would want as Thom Tillis, the conservative, but things that are very important to get this nation healed, get the economy back on track, and to prove to the American people and the citizens of North Carolina that conservative solutions are the best and most sustainable solutions for our country and for our great state. And so I'm going to do everything I can for as long as I'm in the U.S. Senate, and that's at least for about 3.5 more years, to do everything that I can to live up to that promise. And along the way, I will guarantee you, those of us who are willing to commit to this will exercise courage that most people don't think about. When you think about courage, most people think about a Democrat standing up to a Republican or vice versa. I don't think that's courage. That's my job. I'm a Republican. I'm a conservative. I'm supposed to advocate, as Jesse Helms did, for conservative solutions. What political courage means is you're willing to stand up to fellow conservatives and say, I can't go as far as you want to because I want to get something done. I want to produce a result. I want to make a positive impact that goes beyond providing a good speech, which will almost invariably make you fall a little bit short of some of the people who have the, have a perspective that you embrace, but you have the knowledge as to how far you can go and create sustainable, enduring, and impactful policy. So forums like this are very important to stretch our thinking. Agree on what we'd ultimately like to have, but then how do we get there through a series of measured, deliberate steps so that we produce a conservative outcome, which I believe is in the best interest of our nation and in the best interest of our great state. So I look forward to questions later on. I look forward to, do I get to introduce you or somebody else introduce you? Oh, that's too bad. I'd have loved to introduce you, Richard. I'll leave you with this. Finally, in committees, I'm on Senate Armed Services, Veterans, Banking Committee, on Judiciary. It's kind of been an important committee over the past couple of months, and Aging. And Richard and I in the first 2 years, didn't share committees. We had probably the biggest jurisdiction in terms of the numbers of committees we cover. Richard's now on Aging. I think he was signing up for a support group, but he's actually on. He's on that committee now, but what I will tell you, Richard's going to be here later tonight. Richard is a remarkable member of the Senate. He is at the tip of the spear on the Russia investigation. And thank God that he is, because he's one of the most measured, methodical, focused people in the U.S. Senate. And he's working to find the truth. He's working to get to the facts. And he's working well with the ranking member and the Democrats to get to an environment and get to a framework that I think that they have confidence in as well. So again, I look forward to answering any questions. I thank you all for being here. I thank Art for your leadership, and Louis, I thank you for your leadership and your friendship. And I look forward to the rest of the discussion and look forward to hearing my comments from my friend and colleague, Richard Hudson. Thank you.